Final hours of the Pope's health worsening. The news tonight at 9:37 that Pope John Paul II has passed away.
Can be read. All those present here. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
De profundis clamavi at te Domine, Domine exaudi vocem meam. Si iniquitates observaveris Domine, Domine quis sustinevite. Sustinivit Domine, sustinivit anima mea in verbo eius, speravit anima mea in Domino. Qui apud Dominum misericordia, et copiosa apud eum redemptio. Per i presenti di lingua italiana ripetiamo
For those
questo bel
of
salmo dalla
the
tradizione.
Italian language, let us repeat this in the language of our land. I cry to you, we cry to you, O Lord, from the depths. Listen to my voice. Let your ear hark the voice of my prayer. Forgive my sins, O Lord. It is only next to you that these sins can be forgiven. I hope, O Lord, my soul hopes to be the sentinel of dawn.
My clipboard in the car on the seat. My clipboard.
For the Lord is the fountainhead of all mercy, and forgive Israel of all its guilt, all its faults. Let perpetual light shine on him, and let him repose in peace. Virgin Mary, the source of all mercy, and let us remind ourselves of all the sons of Eve and the tears of suffering. And in this context, we turn our eyes to you, the fountain of all mercy, and to you, the Virgin Mary, and to the fruit of your womb. Pray for us, Holy Mother of God. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. Forever and forever. Amen. And the blessing of the Almighty, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, may it descend on all of us and accompany us always. Christ is resurrected. Christ is risen. Alleluia, alleluia. Tomorrow morning at 10:30 in this very square, Cardinal Sodano will celebrate Holy Mass on the Sunday of Divine Mercy for our beloved Holy Father, John Paul II.
For the dead in St. Peter's Square, Pope John Paul II is dead at age 84, and the throne of St. Peter is empty. Our Rome Bureau Chief Alessio Vinci now.
Hello, Jonathan. I think that there are very few words who can express the feeling in St. Peter's Square tonight. We're seeing those very powerful pictures or people in tears. They came here to pay their last respects tonight. Many of them pilgrims, many of them tourists. Perhaps they came here hoping to hear some news about the Pope, and they've been hit by this news tonight that John Paul II has indeed passed away. Cardinal Sodano, the Secretary of State of the Vatican, has told pilgrims that at 10:30 tomorrow morning there will be a Mass in St. Peter's Square, a Holy Mass to commemorate Pope John Paul II. I'd like to bring in my colleague Delia Gallagher. Delia, this is of course a sad day for everybody, not just here in Rome, but indeed around the world.
You know, I was thinking in some ways it was so expected, and yet when it arrives, of course, it's still quite a shock. But I suppose one has to think that the Pope is finally at rest. We've been following him for so many years and his suffering, and certainly in these last few months. I think that must be the thought, aside from the initial sort of grief and shock for our loss, must be that he is finally at peace.
Delia, I would like to pause for a second here. We're seeing some incredible pictures from St. Peter's Square of people crying. Let's pause and listen to how the square is reacting to this news.
I was sick and you assisted me. I was imprisoned and you came to me in prison. The applause, this applause is like the prayer that accompanies the Pope. The angels welcome you and will take you before the throne of God to pray for the Church. The Pope concluded his last day on earth as 50,000 people present on the square. I think it's something like 50,000 were praying for him. And obviously this is a prayer which will have to continue. And Telepace is also very, very grateful for the love and affection which John Paul II gave us ever since 1985. He wanted us to be by his side on his trips, on trips which took him to every corner of the world, and trips which took him into houses, into families, and which spread the majesty, the majesty and the words of the Pope. And we invite everybody to pray now, and we will continue that prayer throughout the night and tomorrow and in subsequent days. Let us listen now to the singing of some groups on the square. Hymns, canticles addressed to the Holy Father, Easter, Alleluia, chants.
9:37 Rome time. A little more than 30 minutes ago, the Vatican tells us, John Paul II died. He was 84 years old. We had watched him as a robust, vigorous man take the throne of St. Peter, and we watched him in his decline. And then, very dramatically, many people prayed for him as he went into seclusion in his final days. CNN's Aaron Brown is in Rome and joins us now. Aaron?
Just, John, to underscore, I think what Delia said a moment ago, it's been so clear for certainly the last 48 hours that the Pope's death was imminent, and for the last couple of months that his health was dramatically failing. Yet to stand here in Rome as we are tonight, to hear those bells toll, and to look at the faces of the people gathered in the square is to make real something that we had all thought about, Catholics and non-Catholics, the life of this extraordinary man who fought the Nazis as a young man, who helped bring down the fall of communism as a pope, who redefined or defined again in a traditionalist way his religion, but whose import extends so far beyond his religion. And he has now died at 9:37 Rome time. The faces tell everything in a moment like this. Young and old.
E da questo momento
And from now
alterneremo
on,
immagini dalla
we will
piazza
alternate pictures of the square of people lamenting the death of the Holy Father with images which we have from the chapel where the Viaticum is still exhibited, which has accompanied the Pope's trajectory over these days. And perhaps this will help us to meditate and reflect
Pope John Paul II outlived his immediate family. He lost his brother when he was very young. He lost his mother and his father as well. And so his death, a little bit more than 30 minutes ago, came without any family around him. His closest colleagues were clerics like himself. And he was surrounded, of course, by the thousands of people who you see now, his family in the truest sense of the word, the faithful of the Roman Catholic Church, so many of whom wanted to be as close as they physically could be to him on this evening. We are watching them pray for him and mourn for him now. Aaron Brown is among them. Aaron?
Ingrid, do that for me again, please.
These are people from so many different backgrounds, a display both of the unity and the diversity of the Church, of the enormous power that this Pope had, a personal magnetism that matched his exalted and sacred office. Pope John Paul II served as Pope longer than almost any other man ever had. His is the third longest papacy, a papacy so long that many Catholics around the world can remember no other Pope. And it has been a truly extraordinary, extraordinary papacy. The Pope, though, caught the flu at the end of January and spent weeks as we all watched his progress at the Gemelli Hospital near the Vatican. It's fair to say, especially now, he never really recovered. He had trouble breathing, and at the end of February, doctors fitted him with a tracheotomy tube in his throat. He grew less able to swallow, and so at the end of March, he was fitted with a feeding tube in his nose. And over the last few days, he fell victim to a urinary infection and a high fever. He suffered septic shock and heart problems. By Friday night, the Pope's condition had worsened further. We learned he was suffering from kidney failure and shortness of breath, a high fever, we learned a short time ago, and then within the last hour, news that Pope John Paul II had died. CNN's Aaron Brown is in Rome, and I think we can hear from him now. Aaron?
John, the official statement issued by the Vatican is simple and direct. It reads, the Holy Father has passed away this evening at 9:37 p.m. in his private apartment. All procedures written in what essentially is Catholic law, Catholic constitution promulgated by John Paul II on the 22nd of February 1996. That is to say, he died in the way he had directed, in accordance with his wishes and directions. This is from the Vatican spokesman a short time ago. John.
What is so extraordinary is that things, in a sense, have come full circle. The Pope spent his life traveling, as no other Pope ever had, visiting 130 countries, and now people have traveled around the world to be close to him. We're seeing some of their faces. We're seeing now something we may want to listen into.
By listening to an excerpt from a speech by Jesus Christ exhorting his disciples to believe in the resurrection.
Non si turbi il vostro cuore.
Let your hearts not be disturbed.
Credete in Dio.
Believe in God
Credete anche in me.
and believe also in me.
Nella casa del Padre mio
In the house
ci
of my
sono
Father,
molte dimore.
there are many, many
Se
chambers, many
Vi
rooms,
avrei forse detto che vado a prepararvi un posto.
and a place will be
Ma
prepared for
quando
you,
sarò andato e vi avrò preparato un posto,
and
ritornerò. E
this place will be
vi
prepared,
prenderò verso di me,
and you will return unto me,
affinché dove sono io
so that where I am,
siate anche voi.
you too will be,
E dove vado io,
and where goeth I,
voi conoscete la via.
you will know the path.
Gli dice Tommaso,
And Thomas
Signore,
said to him,
non
Lord,
sappiamo dove vai.
we do not know
Possiamo
whither you go.
conoscerne la via.
How can we know the path?
Gli dice Gesù,
And Jesus replied to him,
Io sono la via,
I am the
la
way,
verità
the truth,
e la vita.
and the life.
O Dio, vieni a salvarmi. Signore, vieni presto in mio aiuto. Gloria al Padre e al Figlio e allo Spirito Santo, come era nel principio, ora e sempre, e nei secoli dei secoli. Amen. Alleluia.
Primo mistero della gloria.
First mystery of the glory.
Contempliamo
Let us
la
contemplate
risurrezione di Gesù.
the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Dal Vangelo di Luca.
From the Gospel according to St.
Il
Luke,
primo giorno dopo
the
il
first
sabato,
day after
di
the
buon
Sabbath,
mattino si recarono
early,
alla tomba
the
portando con
apostles
sé gli aromi
gathered at the
che avevano
tomb,
preparato.
bringing aromas,
Trovarono la
which they had
pietra
found,
rotolata via dal sepolcro.
and
Ma
they found the
entrate
stone
non trovarono il corpo del
taken away
Signore
from the
Gesù.
entrance to the cave, but
Mentre
inside they did
erano
not
ancora
find the body of
incerte,
Christ.
ecco due uomini
While they
apparire
were still
vicino a
perplexed,
loro,
two men
in
appeared to
vesti
them,
sfolgoranti.
and they were in
Essendosi le donne
refulgent
impaurite e
vestments,
avendo chinato il volto a terra,
and
essi dissero loro:
they bent their heads to the ground and said to them,
cercate tra i morti
"Why
colui
are
che è
you
vivo,
looking
non è qui,
amongst the
è
dead? For
risuscitato."
he who is living, he is not here. He has been
Dal
resuscitated."
catechismo della Chiesa Cattolica.
From the Catechism of the Catholic
Se
Church,
Cristo non è
if
risuscitato,
Christ is not
allora
resuscitated,
è
is
vana
not
la
resurrected,
nostra predicazione,
then our
è vana
preaching
anche la
is
nostra
in
fede.
vain and our faith is in vain.
La risurrezione
The resurrection
costituisce anzitutto
is,
la
above all,
conferma di
the
tutto ciò
confirmation
che Cristo
of
stesso
everything
ha
that Christ
fatto
himself
e insegnato.
did and taught.
Padre nostro, che sei nei
Our
cieli,
Father in
sia
heaven,
santificato il tuo nome,
hallowed be thy
venga
name.
il tuo regno, sia fatta la tua volontà, come in cielo così in terra.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Ave o Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Tu sei benedetta fra le donne, e benedetto
Ave Maria,
il frutto del seno tuo,
you are in
Gesù.
us. You are blessed amongst all women, and blessed be the fruit of thy womb, Jesus Christ.
Ave o Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Tu sei benedetta fra le donne, e benedetto è il frutto del seno tuo, Gesù.
Santa Maria, Madre di Dio, prega per noi peccatori, adesso è nell'ora della nostra morte. Amen.
Ave o Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Tu sei benedetta fra le donne, e benedetto è il frutto del seno tuo, Gesù.
As we watch the prayers at St. Peter's Square, we're not privy to what's going on behind the scenes, but the rituals of the Catholic Church are ancient, and they have, we are told, been followed in this case. We would assume that the Pope's Camerlengo, his chamberlain, has officially verified that the Pope has died. He would, under tradition, be locking and sealing the papal apartments, and he would break the Pope's ring to seal and end his reign. Outside in St. Peter's Square, the prayers continue. CNN's Aaron Brown is there.
The statements of world leaders now to note the passing of John Paul will begin streaming in. President Bush is expected to make a statement from the White House. at about 4 o'clock Eastern Time, so about 35 minutes from now. As John Mann just said, in this ancient city, we now begin an ancient ritual, choreographed from the moment the Pope dies to the selection of a new Pope. John Allen, who works with us in covering the affairs of the Vatican, is with us as well. The next formal moment, John, is what?
Tomorrow morning, we expect there will be a ritual, a rite celebrated in St. Peter's Square around 10:30 in the morning, led by Cardinal Angelo Sodano, who of course is the Pope's Secretary of State. It would be the first of what will be a series of 9 rituals marking, of course, the passage of the Pope, the so-called Novem Diales, or 9 days of mourning. In the meantime, preparations will be made this evening for the lying in state of the Holy Father's body, which will occur in St. Peter's Basilica. And if things hold to form, it will lie in state for 2 or 3 days to allow, of course, the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of mourners who will want to come to the Basilica to pay their respects to the Pope.
And then, at that point, is then the funeral?
Well, actually, each of these 9 rites are, in a sense, you can think of them as funeral rituals, but there will be a high solemn funeral mass at some point during those 9 days. That's exactly which day it will take place on is a decision that will be made by the Camerlengo, or the Chamberlain. That's the official who will govern the Church in this interregnum period. Cardinal Eduardo Martinez Zamalo, the Spanish cardinal, named to that role personally by John Paul II.
You have reported on this Pope for a long, long time. Like all of the rest of us, we all have understood in the last several days that this moment was imminent. Still, when those bells rang, what went through your mind? What did you think?
Well, you know, Aaron, there's a sense in which I've been preparing for this moment for years, and I've thought, of course, for hours upon hours about the logistics, about the organization, about the coverage. What I really wasn't ready for was my emotional reaction to the news of the Pope's passing. Because, as you say, this is not just a historical figure. This is not just the supreme governor, if you like, of one of the, if not the largest and most complex religious organizations on earth. But it's a man, because of his personality, because of the media, with whom those of us who follow him on a daily basis feel that we have formed a kind of personal bond. And in light of that, I guess the first thing that went through me was not so much a thought as an emotion of just profound sadness, a profound void that's going to be left not just on the world stage and not just in the global affairs of the Catholic Church, but in my own life. And this is a man, whether you agreed with the particulars of all of his policies or not, could not help but leave an impression on you.
I recall the moment in Fairbanks, Alaska, now a long time ago, when the Pope had come to meet with then President Reagan, and it was the first time I had seen the Pope, or a Pope, in fact. And I was struck by 2 things. There was this young nun who had come down from the outback of Alaska to see her Pope, and tears streaming down her eyes as she had the briefest of glimpses of him as he rode by. And the other was in Havana many years later.
Dear brothers and sisters, at 21:37, our beloved Holy Father John Paul II has returned to his home. Let us pray for him.
And that was it, the official announcement about half an hour ago that Pope John Paul II had in fact died, his death coming just under an hour ago. You heard the official there saying that he has returned home. Pope John Paul II had lain on his deathbed for at least the last 48 hours. He had been ill for considerably longer. And right now, as news of his death is spreading around Rome and presumably around the world, people are flocking in ever greater numbers to St. Peter's Square behind me. The lights in his private apartment had been on until the announcement of his death. And according to tradition, we will wait to see now how the events play out. But according to tradition, that apartment should be vacated and sealed. The Pope's ring should be broken and the seal broken. And then this formal period of mourning gets underway. The Vatican Square has been crowded all day, as it was all night yesterday, as word of his grave illness and his clinging to the last moments of life spread, and as people of all walks of life, of all ages, of all nationalities came here to pray for him. They came, they said, with a sense of profound sadness, with a sense of support, with a sense of love, and an attempt to give him comfort as he planned to meet his Maker. Whatever the views that people held on the Pope, most people that we talked to and most people around the world, no matter what their faith, recognized that this was indeed a great man, that this was a man of immense personal charisma, immense moral stature, and a man who had really created a unique place for the papacy in our world. For 26 years, one of the longest reigns ever, he sat on the throne of St. Peter and he brought his vision of Catholicism to the world. More than any other pope before him, he embraced all the faiths. He apologized to all the faiths for all the injustices that Christians and Catholics had done. He apologized to the Jews for not doing enough to stop the Holocaust. He apologized to Muslims when he was in the Holy Land for the Crusades. And as I say, he embraced those faiths, was the first pope to enter a synagogue, the first pope to enter a mosque, and the first to be traveled so widely around the world, bringing his unique brand of interfaith conciliation to all his flock and to people all over the world. We're joined, of course, as well by Aaron Brown, CNN anchor of Newsnight, who has also been following this and joins us now from our other location here in Rome. Aaron.
Christiane, thank you. Again, President Bush expected to make a statement at about 4 o'clock Eastern Time from the White House. The president had an interesting relationship with the Pope. He saw him as recently as last summer. They disagreed about the war in Iraq, but they agreed on the president's position on social issues, particularly abortion. And that meeting in Rome reflected both that difference and as well as those areas of agreement. So we wait for the president to make his statement, and that'll be coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Again, as we've been saying, we now begin what is a very ritualized process that leads to the Pope's burial. He lies in state for a number of days, 2 or 3. Tens of thousands of people, perhaps likely more, will come by to see that. There'll be a high funeral, a series of events, a series of funerals, 9 in all, before he's laid to rest. And then shortly thereafter, the days thereafter, a conclave will be called to begin the process of selecting a new pope. And in the meantime, there'll be a tremendous amount of thought given to the extraordinary change and the extraordinary period of this papacy. John Allen, is there, we tend to, I think we focus a lot on his role in when he went to Poland and how that contributed to chipping away the bricks upon which communism were built. Is that the non-theological legacy?
Oh, I think it's an important, if not the most important component of his non-theological legacy. But, you know, this Pope was an extraordinarily adept political actor, I mean, quite apart from his spiritual responsibilities. I mean, if you ask a lot of people in the Muslim world, for example, what was the Pope's most important political contribution, that probably wouldn't come up immediately with the fall of communism. They probably would say his strong moral opposition to the Iraq War and the distinction he helped them to make between the Bush policy in Iraq and the West and Western Christianity. if you go to Chile and Argentina, they would probably tell you his most important contribution was the treaty he negotiated that averted a war between those two countries in 1979. A treaty, by the way, was actually signed in the Vatican to mark the contribution of John Paul II and the Vatican diplomatic team.
Was there anything in his history and background a quarter of a century ago that said he would be this sort of pope?
Well, I think that's one of those historical questions it's almost impossible to answer. But the truth is, after the fact, in other words, looking at his record and trying to find signs in his background that pointed in that direction, I think his love for acting, his capacity to stand on the stage, his sense of the historical moment, his capacity to deliver the just right line at the just right moment. That's why we call him the grand communicator, obviously. I think his voracious intellect, the fact that he consumes books the way some people consume Twinkies. He was and had a truly Catholic with a small c interest. That means universal interests. He read philosophy, he read history, had a wonderful sense of the way history shapes the current moment. Profound student of culture. His record in Poland as a pastor, the spine he showed in standing up to the Soviet taskmasters back in that era. That famous episode of the church in Nowochótka, where the Soviets had built a town in Poland designed to be without God, deliberately with no church, and he celebrated an open-air mass every year in the freezing cold, if necessary, until a church was erected on that spot, because his point was, you cannot understand this culture without God.
Let's go back to the literal beginning. I don't want to say that he became pope in, I want the right delicate term. He assumed the papacy after the very short papacy of John Paul I. 33 days?
33 days, that's right.
Was he known much by other than the core cardinal group?
Well, Aaron, what made his election such a shock, of course, was that he was the first non-Italian in 450 years to sit upon the throne of Peter. But within the cardinals, of course, he was very well known. The media didn't look much at him because the working assumption would be that the next pope, like all the ones before for 450 years, would be an Italian. But in that group, he was well known. And in fact, in May of 1978, the Secretary of State at the time, Cardinal Jean Villot, had a luncheon at his apartment. He invited a few cardinals over to celebrate Wojtyła's birthday. Of course, it's on May 16th. And at one point during that luncheon, Villot remarked to a friend of his, pointing at Wojtyła across the table, that man could be pope. And then he sent a note to his friend, a written note, Villot did, saying, I want to confirm what I said. I believe Wojtyła could be pope. So obviously, within that rather restricted circle, Wojtyła was a known quantity. Again, he was known to be a very gifted pastor, a very adept politician, navigating what were, of course, very difficult waters in Poland in the Soviet era. Known to be a man with great vision, had a great cosmopolitan sense of things. Really quite the package you'd be looking for in a potential pope.
Do we know, and do you think, if we don't, do you think we will someday know what this last week has been like?
Yes, obviously the events in the papal apartment leading up to his death are not covered by any obligation of secrecy. Now, of course, his closest collaborators, Archbishop Stanislaw Dziwisz, the Polish nuns, chief among them, Sister Taviana, who've accompanied him all these many years, they will, of course, observe great discretion about what they saw, what they experienced. But I do expect that they will give out bits and pieces of that as time goes on, as will his physicians and the others who were with him. Because the truth is, the Pope wanted to use his death as he had used his life as a teaching instrument, Aaron. It's no accident. He did not go off and hide as he was suffering. He let that play out in full public view because he wanted to make the point, this is the way you can approach death if you live your life on the basis of faith and hope. And so I believe his collaborators will want that message and want that story to be told.
The bells of the Vatican ringing now. It was a short time ago that bells began ringing here, that formal ancient announcement that a pope has passed on. Christian?
Aaron, thank you. And we're going to go to Krakow now, where 40 years ago, John Paul was elected, was named Archbishop of Krakow in his native Poland. There, of course, people will be in deep mourning. We've seen very poignant images of people who've been praying for him throughout his final illness. People know that he was not just a towering religious figure in Poland under communism when religion was virtually banned, but he was also a towering nationalist, a towering political figure, a figure who is credited as much as anybody with starting the end of communism. And there we find CNN's Chris Burns in Krakow, where he's been monitoring people as they wait for the Pope's death. Chris?
Bishop's residence here in the window where the Archbishop used to stand and sing and speak with the people here is now a black and gold crucifix in the windows. People are looking up with a sense of emptiness, really, and at the same time a sense of reverence and contentment that their favorite son was the Pope of 1.1 billion people in this world and was the man who helped to engineer a peaceful and bloodless revolution here in Poland against the communist regime. As the Pope's death was announced, the priest said, "Christ welcomes him with open arms." The whole crowd of some 8,000 to 10,000 people here fell silent. People fell to their knees, and they began to pray and weep. It's a sea of candles. It's a sea of flowers, of bouquets, and of a lot of tears. People finally facing this fact that their favorite son has now passed on. At the same time, though, that he helped to engineer this country into a democracy, very well anchored into the West, into Europe and the West, and in great part thanks to Karol Wojtyła as he engineered that transition. Back to you.
And Chris, he was so friendly and so supportive of Lech Wałęsa, who was back then a young and slim shipyard worker, starter and founder of the Solidarity movement, and who got so much spiritual and really material support, powerful support from the Pope, particularly as he continued his aim to slowly break down those shackles of communism. What do you think Lech Wałęsa is doing right now, and have you been in touch with him in the last few days?
Lech Wałęsa has been in Krakow. He has been speaking about how the Pope was so very important in bringing about this non-violent change here in Poland. In fact, Lech Wałęsa used the pen from the Vatican to sign the very documents of the Round Table Agreements in 1989 that brought about democracy, that brought about the legalization of the Solidarity trade union, the relegalization. And that is really where he really hands it to the Pope as being the one who offered him the guidance. In fact, during martial law in 1983, it was the Pope who sent messages passed through the robes of various priests in jails and prisons across Poland, giving Solidarity hope, telling them, don't lose hope. And it was the Pope who came here in 1979 when he was first, just after he was first named Pope, and told the country, do not fear not, and change this land. And that was really the beginning of the break, way back there in 1979. So really, it's been decades of incredible transition, not only here in Poland, of course, but across the former Soviet bloc. This was a man who really shook much of the world with his religious leadership.
And of course there was that electrifying moment when the General Wojciech Jaruzelski created martial law in a state of emergency, and the Pope stood up loudly and said, we, the Church, supports the people, supports the workers. And I think that many people will, I believe, write one of his most important legacies as being that incredible figure who started this series of dominoes falling that eventually ended communism in Poland, the Soviet Union, and around the communist bloc. And he also had talked about his meetings with Mikhail Gorbachev and encouraged the West to deal with Mikhail Gorbachev. So in his native Poland, the Pope obviously holds a unique and special place, and not least because, as a Pole, he was the first non-Catholic to be elected Pope in 455 years, an amazing record. And in fact, when we talk a little bit today to some of the Italians who we have seen in the square today and last night as they pray pray, as they say the rosary, as they have tried to comfort Pope John Paul on his last journey, they have told us that some of them, that they feel somewhat guilty today, that when the Pope was first elected, they were feeling a little bit sad that he was a Pole and not an Italian. The Italians feeling very possessive about the papacy, very possessive about having one of their own on the throne of St. Peter for all these many, many centuries, but now saying that they felt sorry about feeling that way because he had showed himself to be such an incredible man, and a man not just of Poland or of Italy, but a man for the whole world, a man for all seasons, a man for all faiths and all people and all ages. He made a special attempt not just to appeal to those faithful, to the religiously committed Catholics, people who were very sure of their faith, but to reach out to those who were not, to reach out to the young as well. And he knew that the young would be necessary to continue the vitality of the Church, which in many parts of the world, as we've seen, has been dwindling over the last 10, 20 years, certainly under his papacy. And that, of course, as we've been talking, is going to be a big challenge for whoever is elected next Pope of this 1.1 billion flock of Catholics around the world. How will that person be able to bring the Church perhaps more in contact with the people, bring the people back inside the Church, make a Church that people consider more relevant to themselves? Our CNN bureau chief, Alessio Vinci, has been here all days and all weeks, and he's been covering this Pope for many, many years through his illnesses, through his sicknesses, and through his triumphs as well. What, you know, obviously for everybody this is a sad moment, for Catholics, for reporters who've been covering him, and for all these people who are flocking now into St. Peter's Square. What have you been seeing over the last few days?
An incredible amount of emotions, Christian. I think that as I've been reporting throughout these past few days, you know, the story of the sick Pope is an old story. This has been a man who has been going through a series of ailments that for a good part of his papacy. In 1981 he was shot, and then from there on it was a long history of ailments. And this is perhaps an issue that has brought him closer to the people. He has spent so much time during his papacy discussing what it means to be sick, to be underprivileged. And I think that because this world is populated primarily with underprivileged people, this is a man who was able to speak to the masses. And we're seeing just a little bit of it here in Rome tonight. People from all walks of life, poor, rich, old, young. And this is a man who could just say things that even if you disagreed with, could reach out and reach the people's heart. I mean, I would remember asking younger generations about what is about this Pope that is against gay marriage, it's against abortion, against birth control. What does it do to you as a young person? And all they would say is, you don't have to necessarily agree with this Pope in order to share his feelings. One person recently told me, you know, he's like a pop star. You know, we in Italy especially, he said, we like rock, we don't understand the words, but we like the rhythm, we like the music. And I think what in this Pope they really liked was the fact that his words, even if you didn't agree with what he was saying, his words really sounded familiar to all the people here in Rome and around the world. And I think this is the reason why we're seeing this amazing amount of grief and sorrow tonight.
As you talk about music, let's just stop for a moment and listen to the singing, the voices in Vatican Square right now.
Disse Gesù, un poco e non mi vedrete più, e poi un poco ancora e mi vedrete. Allora alcuni dei suoi discepoli dissero fra loro,
At that point,
che è mai
some
questo che ci
of the
dice
apostles
un
said
poco
amongst
e non mi
themselves,
vedrete,
what
e
does
poi
it
ancora
mean?
un poco e mi
Soon you
vedrete?
will not see me, and
Che
then soon
significa,
after you
io
will.
me ne
And
vado
what
al Padre?
does it mean to say, I am
Dicevano
leaving you
dunque,
for my
che
Father?
mai questo un poco di cui parla?
What is this soon of which he speaks? We do not comprehend what
Gesù conobbe che
he
volevano
says, what he
interrogarlo
means.
e disse loro,
And
vi interrogate fra di voi riguardo
Jesus
a ciò che vi ho
saw
detto,
this
un poco
and said,
e non mi vedrete, e poi
I
ancora un poco
can see you
e mi
perplexed.
vedrete.
But I tell
In
you
verità,
again,
in verità vi dico,
soon you will not see me,
voi
and soon
piangerete
again you will see me
e
again.
gemerete,
You will weep
mentre il
and you
mondo
will
si rallegrerà.
groan.
Voi vi rattristerete,
But as the world
ma
grows
la vostra
merry,
tristezza
you will grow sad,
cambierà
but
in
your
gioia.
sadness will be turned
La
into
donna,
joy.
quando partorisce ha tristezza,
When
perché è
a woman
venuta
gives
la sua
birth,
ora,
she
ma quando ha partorito
is
il
sad
bambino,
because she
non
sees
si
her
ricorda
hour has
più
come.
della
But when she
sofferenza,
sees the baby,
per la
she doesn't
gioia
remember
che è
her
nato
suffering
un uomo.
anymore, because she
Anche
has
voi ora
given
avete
birth
tristezza,
to a man.
ma vi vedrò di nuovo.
The same with you. You
Il
see your
vostro
sadness
cuore
now,
si
but
rallegrerà
soon you will
e
rejoice.
la vostra
Your heart will
gioia
rejoice,
nessuno ve la potrà rapire.
and nobody will be able to take this joy away from you.
Quarto mistero della gloria.
You heard the words rejoice. For the Pope, for the Catholics, death is not an end, but it is the beginning of eternal life. And certainly this Pope felt that very, very, very powerfully. He also knew that people were out here praying for him. According to the Vatican spokesman today, the early bulletin today said extraordinarily that he had managed to get some words out and that they had struggled to piece those words together when they had told him that the Vatican Square, St. Peter's Square, below his illuminated private apartments was full of the faithful, full of people coming to pray for him and pray with him as he prepared to pass on. They said that he said, I see that you have come to me, and for that I thank you. So this was a Pope who, and we will be talking about his legacy, his doctrine, his theology for several days to come, but no matter what people thought about it, and no matter the fact that in many parts of the world, particularly the developed world, the church, the congregation was beginning to dwindle, somehow people's personal connection and people's personal admiration for him transcended perhaps some of their unease with the more doctrinaire, orthodox theology that he prescribed for Catholics around the world, and that many Catholics felt that they simply could not practice in today's modern world, and caused many Catholics to follow their own conscience instead of his. Let's go back to Aaron for a moment now. Aaron?
Christian, thank you. I think you're right that in the days ahead there'll be much time spent analyzing this quarter of a century of John Paul's papacy. But it also strikes me that on a night like tonight, in a moment like this, the most powerful not are the words, but are the pictures that we see, whether they're the pictures from St. Peter's that we've been looking at, the faces of the tens of thousands of people there. There's a scene in Krakow, in Poland, going on now that says much about the Pope and his roots. He was born not far from there. This is outside the residence of the Archbishop of Krakow in Poland. And people, tens of thousands of them, spontaneously, and I suspect absolutely in silence, are coming by with candles and prayers and tears. Hear the hymns being sung. There are so few moments like this, really, where people just come out to be together, to share a moment. Often it's a moment of grief like this, spontaneously. Chris Burns is in Krakow. Chris?
Yes, Aaron. The significance of this building is this is the Archbishop's residence where the Pope had resided as he was Archbishop here and returned repeatedly and stayed in this residence when he was Pope. And I was here the last time that he was in that window up above the entrance. It was back in 2002 in his last visit. And it was a very, very touching moment where the Pope was singing and speaking to the people outside. It was packed like it is tonight, and the people were singing, "We won't let you go. We won't let you go back." And he would say, "How could you do that? I need to go back to the Vatican." But they were sort of teasing each other, and it was a beautiful moment where late at night, the Polish people are speaking with the Pope of 1.1 billion followers around the world, and here he is in a very intimate talk with the people from his country, the favorite son of this land. And this is what the people are back to remember, not only, of course, that night back in 2002, but in 1979 when he first came as Pope and inspired people to freedom. And it's really, there's so many moments that go through people's minds. Also, when the Pope returned repeatedly after martial law, before martial law, and during martial law, when people were imprisoned, and he was passing messages to some of those in prison, telling them, "Don't lose hope, don't lose hope." And it's a lot of some of these people are way too young to have lived through any of this, and yet they are here with their families, with their parents, and by themselves, inspired by this Pope who very much was uplifted by youth, whoever he spoke to. And it was a symbiotic kind of thing. The youth are back here to mark that, and it was quite moving to see. Yesterday there was a woman who was 30 years old with her 5-year-old daughter saying, "I saw the Pope when he first came here in '79 when I was my daughter's age, and I want her to witness what is going on now, which is the end of an era, the end of the life of the greatest man of Poland living at this time." So in this sea of candles and tears and flowers, it's an incredibly emotional moment for so many people. At the same time, many of them have been preparing themselves for this moment for quite some time. Back even since 2002 when the Pope came here for the last time, when you had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, essentially knowing very well that this man is very weak, and we have to tell him goodbye, and telling each other goodbye, especially on that night just before he left, from this window, the emotion was palpable. Aaron.
Chris, thank you. Chris Burns. We expect in a moment or two, perhaps a couple of minutes, President Bush will make a statement from the White House. Dana Bash is at the White House, and so let's bring Dana in now. Dana, the President's relationship to the Pope was political, and on that there were some disagreements and some agreements, and then there was an element of personal, as you can see the flag now flying at half-staff at the White House. Dana.
That's right, Aaron. Personal, and that is perhaps what was the most interesting to observe, particularly at the last meeting that the President had with the Pope at the Vatican a year ago, about in June, and that is to watch somebody as powerful as an American president look and essentially admit that he was so humbled in the presence of somebody like the Pope. And that is something that his aides have commented on, particularly in the last few days as the Pope's condition has become so much more grave. But as you mentioned, they sort of had an interesting relationship. They agreed on a lot of things, particularly on the issue of abortion, their opposition to abortion. In fact, the president adopted a Vatican term, the phrase, the culture of life, for his campaign, and certainly talks about that quite frequently. But the president also got some blunt words from the Pope on some of the things that he opposed. For example, front and center was the war in Iraq, and the president certainly heard about that in person at the Vatican from the Pope. So they certainly did have a complicated relationship. One thing I should mention to you, Aaron, that is interesting here at the White House that I just sort of noticed coming out here is that this is one of those you remember when moments. I passed a woman, a tourist here, who said to her son, "You'll always remember that we were at the White House when the Pope died." So certainly they are preparing for some solemn words inside the president himself, but even outside here, just as we are seeing in St. Peter's Square, there is a very solemn feeling. Aaron.
Dana, just stay with us. We'll stay with this until the president takes to the podium, and he is about to do so. Here's the president.
Okay. Aaron, we are expecting the president probably in about 2 minutes. What you're looking at is the cross halls. That is an area that actually the president tends to come to when he gives solemn speeches, when he comes to give remarks to the country, to address the nation on different occasions. And the president certainly said earlier today that the Pope, he feels, is an inspiration. He talks about the Pope as somebody who is a symbol of freedom, and that is something that is important to the president as president, but also perhaps to many of his top aides who worked for toppling communism and see the Pope as somebody who is a central figure in doing so. That is what we've heard from some top of Bush officials over the past few days, Aaron.
Again, just to speak to, as we wait for the president to take the podium, the complicated nature of the relationship. The Pope was also a champion of the poor. The Pope talked sometimes about the excesses of capitalism. The Pope had his own views and his own mind. And the president, as powerful as any president of the United States is, the Pope saw the world as the Pope saw the world. And so there were these areas of disagreement. But I think everyone who remembers the president's visit last summer with the Pope, and I'm sure the president was mindful that it was very possibly the last time they would see, how respectful, how in awe, if you will, the president seemed as he sat next to the Pope, presenting the Pope with a medal. You see the president moving towards the podium with the First Lady at his side, as she was in Rome last summer.
In mourning the passing of Pope John Paul II. The Catholic Church has lost its shepherd. The world has lost a champion of human freedom, and a good and faithful servant of God has been called home. Pope John Paul II left the throne of St. Peter in the same way he ascended to it, as a witness to the dignity of human life. In his native Poland, that witness launched a democratic revolution that swept Eastern Europe and changed the course of history. Throughout the West, John Paul's witness reminded us of our obligation to build a culture of life in which the strong protect the weak. And during the Pope's final years, his witness was made even more powerful by his daily courage in the face of illness and great suffering. All popes belong to the world, but Americans had special reason to love the man from Krakow. In his visits to our country, the Pope spoke of our providential Constitution, the self-evident truths about human dignity in our Declaration, and the blessings of liberty that follow from them. It is these truths, he said, that have led people all over the world to look to America with hope and respect. Pope John Paul II was himself an inspiration to millions of Americans and to so many more throughout the world. We will always remember the humble, wise, and fearless priest who became one of history's great moral leaders. We're grateful to God for sending such a man, a son of Poland, who became the Bishop of Rome and a hero for the ages.
President Bush, in a brief statement from the White House, describing the Pope as a champion of freedom, a witness to the dignity of human life. The president talked about the Pope's commitment to build a culture of life. It is ironic, I think, in a week where Americans have been engaged in a sometimes rancorous discussion of what means life and what means death and how death should come, that this week ends with the death of the Pope in precisely the way the Pope believed death should come, at its right time, at the time of God's choosing. After such a week in the United States where the debate was often so harsh, it is simply an ironic end to it all. The Pope passed away at 9:37 this evening here in Rome. The bells in the city began tolling shortly thereafter. St. Peter's Square remains full of tens of thousands of people who have sat mostly silently and tearfully to mark a moment, as the President said, a moment of history. Christiane.
Aaron, yes, we can hear those bells clearly down here as they toll. We can also see just behind us the road leading to St. Peter's Square packed with people as they simply keep coming here, as news of his death has obviously spread now around the world. And here in Rome, everyone who we've spoken to, even people who are non-Catholics, are just coming to pay their respects, to say goodbye to a great man, as they did in his hours before he passed on, to try and bring him comfort. The Pope, as the President extolled, was the leader and the progenitor of a democratic revolution that swept Eastern Europe. And that, I think, resonates very strongly with this administration, given what it is trying to do in the Middle East. And while many people don't believe that the Middle East is quite Eastern Europe in terms of the dominoes falling, many people do and will forever hold him up as the great champion of freedom behind the Iron Curtain and the great motivator for the end and the crumbling of that wall of communism, the great horror of the part of the 20th century, and how he helped to end that. He is also, although he disapproved and disagreed with the 2003 Iraq war, was not just simply a knee-jerk anti-war pope. He believed that there was such a thing as a just war, and when we were covering Bosnia and the Balkans, we heard him say many times that it would be just to end the suffering and the genocide of one ethnic group there, and he did support intervention there. But he also was such a force for all sorts of oppression. He was one of the first to decry racism, and particularly apartheid in South Africa. He was amongst the first of the great leaders to decry poverty and dispossession wherever he found it. And this, I think, is what holds him in such high regard, despite the controversy that people have and despite the deep feelings of unease that the faithful feel at, for instance, his refusal to allow condoms to be used, even in the most desperate and tragic cases which could prevent the spread of AIDS and other killer diseases like that. So while there were so many issues on which people differed from him, again, at times like this, in the lead up to his death, as the world really formed a global death watch for this Pope, and now that he has passed, you can see the expressions on people's faces. No matter their differences with many aspects of Catholic doctrine and ideology, they still recognize that this was a man unlike many others, that this was one of the rare leaders of true and consistent moral values, moral stature, and who held the line even when it was unpopular. We're joined now in London by Michael Walsh, who is one of the Pope's significant biographers. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you think in the end he will be remembered?
Well, I think for one thing he'll be remembered as a man of courage. You know, you saw in earlier pictures people filing past the Archiepiscopal Palace in Krakow. I don't think anybody's commented, and I think it's worth commenting that, you know, he studied theology in that palace. He studied it secretly under the Nazi regime. That took great courage. He certainly was a man of courage. You've commented the fact that not everybody went along with his views, but he had no doubt he was always ready to express them and express them logically, coherently. He was, after all, a remarkably good philosopher for a pope, as it were, philosopher and a theologian, but particularly a philosopher. And he put his views forward with a simplicity of language and directness that I think has made a great impact on the world.
And what do you think the challenge now will be? There's so much, obviously, speculation about not just who will be elected in his place, but what their mission will be, how they will be able to enlarge the church in terms of congregations, whether it'll be somebody who will be destined to have a long reign as Pope, or whether they might choose somebody who will have a shorter reign and not stamp such an incredible personal imprimatur on the papacy. Where do you think that is going to go over the next few days and weeks?
Well, I think you've touched on some of the most significant areas in discussing that, because I think one thing is pretty clear, and it's pretty clear generally in the history of the Church, that a long pontificate, and after all, this is the second longest in the history of the Church, a long pontificate is almost always followed by a short pontificate, because, as you say, a pope had this length of time, this 26 years, to impose his view of the Church upon the Church. And I think that the people who come to elect a successor will want someone who is not perhaps going to have that ability, not going to be able to form it in the image of a particular image, in his own image. So I think they'll be looking for someone who is an older man, that's for one thing. But I think it's a very hard act to follow. We can't ever expect to have a pope that's quite like John Paul II. They won't be looking for that. I'm sure they won't be looking for that. They'll be looking for someone who, I think, for instance, will want to decentralize again the authority of the Church. I know I've talked to cardinals who, those who are diocesan bishops, are all very upset in a sense by the way in which authority has been gathered into Rome, taken out of the diocese. We thought after the Second Vatican Council in the 60s the Church was going to get a little more decentralized, a little more democratic, if you were. That hasn't happened under the present Pope. I think there will be those meeting in the conclave that will start in 15 days' time. There are those who will want to reinstitute a bit of that democracy, a bit of that decentralization that we were looking forward to in the 1960s and early 70s.
As we look now at these incredible shots of St. Peter's Square, and we have seen individuals there praying, led by priests, we can see candles, the great symbol of life in the Christian Catholic religion, candles being lit, rosaries being recited, the Lord's Prayer being said, and general prayer being said for the repose of the Pope's soul in eternal peace. As we see that, when we think about the challenges ahead, and they are real challenges that Catholics really want to grapple with, because so many people love their faith and want to be able to continue their faith in a way that's relevant to today's world, and in a way that they are able to be good Catholics and good Christians. What, for instance, will become of the need to recruit more priests? I mean, we know that the issue of celibacy, which is not doctrine but tradition, the issue of celibacy is one that is really having a drastic effect on the number of priests in the Catholic Church. And of course we can talk about the other issues of the sex scandals, the child abuse scandals, leading perhaps some say from this very draconian imposition of personal behavior on priests.
Well, I think one has to be a bit careful about this, to be quite honest. I mean, it is perfectly true that celibacy is only a tradition, not a discipline. But it is a tradition that goes back an awful long time. It goes back really to the early centuries of the Church. So it's going to be something that, even if it is changed, is going to be difficult to change. I think one has to face up to that. Secondly, you know, it's not altogether, it's not exactly true that the number of priests is in decline. It is in the Western world, it is in the United States and the United Kingdom, it is in Canada, but it's not elsewhere. And I think that's one of the things that we in the West tend to forget, that the developing world has rather a different view of things. In fact, one thing I've just been talking about the decentralization of authority. In the West, in some parts of the Church, you know, they actually want more authority. We in the West tend to want less. They want more. And so there are all these things to be kept in balance. But I don't think that we're going to see, immediately at least, the disappearance of celibacy as a means of restoring the numbers of the clergy. What I think we might see, and I've heard archbishops in this country say quite publicly that they would hope for the ordination of married men to the priesthood, people who are older, perhaps retired, to, as it were, plug the gaps in the number of the parochial clergy.
Michael Walsh, thank you so much indeed for joining us. And as you say, of course, whether it be in the developed world or in the developing world, whenever the Pope went out and made his pontifical visit, one was always struck by the immense crowds, the tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people who turned out to see him, to pray in open-air masses, and who took so much comfort and joy from the fact that he visited their countries. And beyond just his praying and his pastoral missions, he also was responsible for renewing diplomatic ties between the Vatican and so many countries, not least England, the United States, Israel, Spain, and a whole host of countries that had severed ties with the Vatican. So he was unique. People responded to him in an incredible, visceral way, and he, of course, will be missed by certainly all these people who are praying for him now and who have done so over the last days, the last weeks and months of his severe and debilitating illness. Aaron?
Christiane, I dare say we'll all have thousands of words to speak in the days ahead, but just for a few moments, let's do some listening, listening to the hymns being sung, taking in a moment of history and an opportunity just to feel it.
Colmato di beni gli affamati, ha rimandato i ricchi a mani vuote, ha soccorso Israele suo servo, ricordandosi della sua misericordia. Ai nostri padri, ad Abramo e alla sua discendenza per sempre. Gloria al Padre e al Figlio e allo Spirito Santo.
In days like this, in a moment like this, important historical and theological and cultural elements to talk about, but there's something else here as well. Chris Burns, when he was reporting to us a short time ago from Krakow, talked about a playful moment the Pope had with thousands who had come to the Archbishop's residence in Krakow to see him, and they shouting to him, "You can't go, you can't leave," and he saying back playfully, "I must leave, I have to go." This is outside the Archbishop's residence in Krakow. Just in the very back, you can just barely make it out. The two flags there, those are the Vatican colors, and there is a black ribbon draped over one of them, the ribbon of mourning. The Pope, having this playful moment with the people in Krakow. Alessio Vinci, our Royal Bureau Chief, talked about the Pope as having a kind of pop star quality to him. A man told me today as I was making my way here that a number of years ago, when he was 14, he had the opportunity to meet the Pope. And this is a young Italian man, and he was, as anyone would be, no matter how old they were, he was very nervous, and the Pope put out his hand so this young man could kiss his ring, as is the protocol, the tradition. And this man told me that in his nervousness he forgot what he was supposed to do, and so he shook the Pope's hand. And the Pope looked at him and gave him a big, broad smile and a laugh. So he was many different things. He was leader, he was historical figure, but above all, Catholic or non-Catholic, he touched people in unforgettable ways. Alessio Vinci is at St. Peter's, as he has been now for the last several days. Alessio?
You know, Aaron, when we reflect about the Catholics and the non-Catholics liking this Pope, I can only remember a trip that I took with the Holy Father to Azerbaijan. You couldn't imagine a more faraway place from Rome, a more faraway place from Catholicism. If I remember correctly, in the entire country, the total population of Catholics was about between 300 and 600. Yet when we arrived in Baku, and as we spent a day or so there with the Pope, by the thousands, they came to the street to welcome this Holy Father, who at that time, it was only a few years ago, could barely speak. He was already weak. He was already having a hard time communicating words. And yet, when he spoke to the people there of Azerbaijan, they came in throngs. And even if he himself could not communicate directly to them, his messages were read in part or sometimes entirely by his own aides traveling with him. Nevertheless, you could feel in the crowd that these people really understood him. And likewise, when traveling to predominantly Catholic countries, including his native Poland. I was in Poland during his last trip in 2002, a mass in Krakow, 1 million people joining there on a Sunday. And I remember as this Pope, again there, unable to say the Mass in its entirety, he was concelebrating this Mass. I remember 1 million people, this man could barely be heard, and yet everybody was listening to him. You couldn't hear a pin drop in a square in a park this big. And Aaron, one more thing I wanted to mention: we are expecting the Vatican to issue a new bulletin, a new announcement